They called it a miracle. I called it fate. The hospital, usually buzzing with the sounds of hurried nurses, beeping machines, and murmured prayers, was still that night. And that's when it happened. A dog, of all things, walked through the automatic doors as if it owned the place. It started as an ordinary night at St. Hope's Hospital. The graveyard shift had just begun, and the staff were settling into their routines. The small community hospital was never too chaotic, even in emergencies, but there was always an underlying tension. Most nights were predictable. This one was not. At 11:37 p.m., security cameras captured something unusual. A shaggy, golden-haired dog trotting purposefully through the sliding glass doors of the hospital's main entrance. The dog wasn't scrappy or wild-looking. In fact, it seemed well-fed and had an air of determination, as though it had a mission to fulfill. Security guard Paul Thompson spotted it first. A big man with a stern demeanor, Paul wasn't easily fazed. But the sight of a dog strolling into a hospital unsettled him. He jumped up from his chair, muttering, "What in the world?" He reached for his radio to alert the staff, but something made him pause. The dog had stopped and looked at him. Not with fear, not with aggression, but with an almost human-like intensity. The dog didn't wait for permission. It continued down the brightly lit corridor, its nails clicking softly against the polished linoleum. Paul followed at a safe distance, unsure whether to shoo it away or let it continue. The animal seemed to know exactly where it was going, weaving through halls and passing rooms as if guided by some invisible force. In room 203, a young mother named Rachel had finally dozed off. Her newborn son, Ethan, lay in a crib beside her. Ethan was barely 2 weeks old, born prematurely, and his fragile condition had kept him under close observation. The staff knew Ethan as a fighter, tiny but resilient. Rachel had been by his side every moment since his birth, refusing to leave even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. That night, however, Rachel's fatigue won out. Her head rested against the edge of Ethan's crib, her hand loosely clutching his blanket. The room was dimly lit, the monitors casting a soft glow as they tracked Ethan's vital signs. All was quiet until the dog arrived. The animal pushed its nose against the slightly ajar door, nudging it open with a soft creak. Its ears perked up as it surveyed the room, its gaze landing on the crib. Slowly, carefully, the dog approached. It stopped beside Ethan, lifting its head to sniff the air. At that exact moment, Nurse Olivia Carter was making her rounds. Olivia had worked at St. Hope's for over a decade. She had seen everything from joyous recoveries to heartbreaking losses. But nothing could have prepared her for what she saw when she reached room 203. The sight froze her in her tracks, a dog, standing beside the baby's crib, its nose inches from the fragile infant. Her first instinct was to scream or chase the animal away, but something stopped her. The dog wasn't acting aggressively. Instead, it seemed calm, protective even. Olivia carefully stepped into the room, her heart pounding. The dog didn't react to her presence. Instead, it leaned closer to the crib and gently nudged the blanket covering Ethan with its nose. The baby stirred but didn't wake. Hey there," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out a hand, unsure whether the dog would lash out. To her surprise, it turned its head and looked at her with eyes that seemed impossibly wise. Then it did something extraordinary. It barked, not loudly but enough to make Olivia jump. The sound wasn't menacing, it was more like an alert. That's when Olivia noticed something. The heart monitor connected to Ethan had started to beep irregularly. She rushed to the machine, her training kicking in, and saw that Ethan's oxygen levels were dropping rapidly. Panic surged through her as she hit the emergency call button. Within seconds, the room was a whirlwind of activity. Doctors and nurses poured in, stabilizing Ethan as alarms blared. Rachel woke up in confusion, clutching her son's crib as tears streamed down her face. "What's happening? Is he okay?" The medical team worked quickly, and Ethan's condition began to stabilize. One of the doctors turned to Olivia. "Good catch," he said. "If you hadn't noticed the monitor, we might have lost him." Olivia opened her mouth to explain, but the words caught in her throat. How could she tell them that it wasn't her who had noticed first? That it was a dog, a strange, uninvited dog, that had alerted her to the danger. When the chaos subsided and Ethan was declared stable, Olivia turned to look for the animal. But the dog was gone. It had vanished as quietly as it had appeared, leaving behind only questions. Paul Thompson swore he had seen the dog leave the hospital a few minutes after the commotion began. It trotted out the same way it had come in, disappearing into the night. Despite checking security footage and asking around, no one could identify where the dog had come from or who it belonged to. Word spread quickly through the hospital. Staff began calling the animal the guardian. Some believed it was just a stray with impeccable timing. Others whispered about divine intervention. As for Olivia, she couldn't shake the feeling that the dog's appearance was no coincidence. It had come for a reason, and its actions had saved Ethan's life. But why? And how had it known? These questions lingered in Olivia's mind as she prepared to leave her shift. Little did she know, the dog's story was far from over. The events of that night left the staff at St. Hope's Hospital abuzz with speculation, but for Olivia Carter, the incident became a quiet obsession. She couldn't shake the image of the dog's penetrating gaze or the sense of purpose in its actions. As she sat at her kitchen table the following morning, sipping her coffee, her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was trained, she muttered to herself, a service dog. But how would it know about Ethan? She decided to dig deeper. That afternoon, Olivia requested access to the hospital's security footage. Her supervisor, a kind but skeptical man named Dr. Harris, reluctantly agreed. "You're really chasing a ghost, aren't you?" he said with a smirk. "Maybe," Olivia replied. But what if this ghost saved a life? As Olivia reviewed the footage, she noticed something odd. The dog hadn't wandered aimlessly through the hospital. From the moment it entered, it moved with an uncanny sense of direction. It bypassed the bustling ER, ignored the cafeteria where smells of food might have tempted it, and headed straight for the pediatric wing. It knew exactly where to go. Olivia whispered, her finger tracing the screen. The footage also revealed something else. When the dog reached the entrance to room 2103, it paused and tilted its head, almost as if it was listening to something. Then it pushed the door open and entered. "What were you listening to?" Olivia murmured, staring at the screen as though the dog might answer her. Olivia wasn't the only one curious about the mysterious canine. Rachel, the young mother, couldn't stop thinking about it either. She had been too overwhelmed with worry to process the details that night. But now that Ethan was stable, her mind kept returning to the dog. Who was it, and why her baby? The following evening, while Rachel sat beside Ethan's crib, a knock startled her. She opened the door to find an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. The woman clutched a small leash in her hand. At the end of it was the dog. Rachel's jaw dropped. "It's you," she exclaimed, pointing at the animal. The woman chuckled. "So, you've met Max?" "Max," Rachel repeated. Her eyes filled with questions. How? Why was he here? The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of solemnity. "I don't know why he was there that night, but I can tell you this. Max has always had a knack for being in the right place at the right time." The woman introduced herself as Helen Moore, a retired school teacher who lived a few blocks from the hospital. She explained that Max had been her companion for over 8 years. "He's not just any dog," Helen said. "He's special." Rachel invited Helen inside, eager to hear more. Over cups of tea, Helen shared Max's story. He had been a stray when she found him, shivering and injured on the side of a highway. She took him in, and from the very beginning, he showed an unusual sensitivity to people in distress. "There's a story I never tell anyone," Helen said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "One night, a few years ago, I woke up to Max barking like mad. He dragged me to the window, and when I looked outside, I saw smoke. A house down the street was on fire. If Max hadn't woken me up, the family inside might not have made it." Rachel listened, stunned. "So you think he senses things?" "I don't just think," Helen said firmly. "I know." As Rachel stroked Max's fur, she noticed something peculiar, a faint scar running along his side. "What happened here?" she asked. Helen looked at the scar and smiled faintly. "That's where I found him, injured. The vet said it was from an old wound, possibly a fight. But I like to think it's his badge of courage." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. This dog wasn't just a random stray. He was a survivor, and now, it seemed, he had become a guardian. Before Helen and Max left, Rachel asked, "Do you think he'll come back to see Ethan?" Helen hesitated. "I don't know, but if Max feels there's still work to be done, he will." That night, as Rachel slept with Ethan safely beside her, Max reappeared. This time, outside the hospital. Security guard Paul spotted him on the cameras again, pacing near the entrance. Paul, now convinced the dog wasn't just any animal, went outside. "What is it, boy?" Paul asked, crouching down. Max barked once, turned, walking toward the street. Paul hesitated, then decided to follow. Max led him several blocks away to an alley near the hospital. There, Paul found a young man slumped against the wall, unconscious. A quick call to 911 revealed that the man was diabetic and had collapsed after a dangerous drop in his blood sugar. Max had saved another life. Word of Max's heroic actions spread quickly. The hospital staff began to see him as more than a curious visitor. To them, he was a guardian angel, watching over those in need. But for Olivia, Rachel, and now Paul, one question remained unanswered. How did Max know? The story of Max, the mysterious dog, had captured the hearts of everyone at St. Hope's Hospital. Yet for Olivia, Rachel, and Paul, the pieces of the puzzle still didn't quite fit. How could Max, a seemingly ordinary dog, possess such extraordinary instincts? As whispers of his heroic acts spread through the community, more questions arose than answers. It was 2 nights after Max led Paul to the diabetic man. Rachel had barely slept since Ethan's health scare, but that night exhaustion finally overtook her. As she drifted into a deep sleep beside Ethan's crib, she had a dream unlike any she'd ever experienced. Rachel found herself standing in a golden field. The air was warm, and the sky glowed with a strange, soft light. She wasn't alone. Ethan was there, giggling in her arms, healthier than she'd ever seen him. And standing just a few feet away was Max. But Max wasn't alone either. Behind him stood a figure, vague, almost translucent. It was a man, tall and gentle, looking with a kind smile. The figure placed a hand on Max's head, as though giving him a command. Then, with a wave of his arm, the man pointed to Rachel and Ethan. Rachel woke with a start. The dream had felt so vivid, so real, that she found herself looking around the room as though expecting to see Max. Instead, she saw only Ethan, still peacefully asleep. But the dream had planted a seed of curiosity in her mind. Who, or what, was guiding Max? The next morning, Rachel shared her dream with Olivia, who listened intently. Olivia had been digging into Max's story and was beginning to wonder if there was more to the dog than anyone realized. Just as Rachel finished recounting her dream, there was a knock at the door of Ethan's hospital room. An unfamiliar man stood there, holding a small, weathered notebook. He was in his 60s, with a rugged face and piercing blue eyes. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "My name's Tom. I heard about your dog." Rachel frowned. "Max? He's not my dog." Tom smiled faintly. "Maybe not in the usual sense, but I think he was meant to find you." Olivia and Rachel exchanged a look. "What do you mean?" Olivia asked. Tom held up the notebook. "I've been following stories like Max's for years. Dogs that show up in the right place at the right time, saving lives, bringing comfort. Most people chalk it up to coincidence, but I don't believe in that. I think these animals are chosen." Tom explained that he was a retired firefighter who had dedicated his life to studying what he called guardian animals. His notebook was filled with accounts of dogs, cats, even birds that had performed miraculous acts of intervention. Max, he believed, was one of them. "I've seen this before," Tom said. "Dogs that seem to have a sense beyond what we can explain. They appear where they're needed most, and then they're gone. Some say it's instinct, but I think it's something higher." Rachel hesitated. "Higher, like divine." Tom nodded. "Call it you want. God, fate, the universe. But there's no denying that these animals have a purpose." Olivia leaned forward. "Do you think Max is guided by something or someone?" Tom's eyes sparkled with intrigue. "I think Max has a connection to something we can't fully understand. And if you had a dream about him, it means you're part of his purpose." That evening, as the hospital settled into its usual rhythm, Max reappeared. This time, he was sitting outside the pediatric wing, his golden fur illuminated by the streetlights. Paul, now a firm believer in Max's extraordinary abilities, approached him with a sense of reverence. "What's next, buddy?" Paul asked softly. Max barked once, then got up and began to walk. Paul followed without hesitation, calling Olivia and Rachel to let them know. "He's on the move again," Paul said. "I think you two should see this." Within minutes, Rachel and Olivia caught up to Paul and Max. The dog led them to a nearby park where a young boy sat alone on a bench, clutching his chest. His breathing was shallow, and his face was pale. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked, rushing to the boy's side. The boy shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I can't breathe," he gasped. Olivia quickly assessed the situation. "Asthma," she said, spotting the inhaler that had fallen to the ground. She retrieved it and helped the boy use it. Slowly, his breathing steadied. Max sat quietly beside the boy, his eyes never leaving him. After the boy was safe, his parents arrived, thanking Rachel, Olivia, and Paul profusely. But Rachel couldn't stop thinking about how Max had known to come here. It was as if he'd been sent to find the boy, just as he'd been sent to Ethan. Later that night, Rachel and Olivia sat together, poring over Tom's notebook. Each story they read seemed more unbelievable than the last, but they all shared a common thread: the animals appeared when they were needed most, and their actions often defied logic. It wasn't until Tom returned a few days later that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. He handed Rachel an old photograph, a black and white image of a dog that looked strikingly similar to Max. The photo was dated 1956. This dog, Tom explained, saved 3 children from a house fire in my hometown. He disappeared right after, and no one ever saw him again. Rachel stared at the photo, her heart pounding. "Are you saying this is Max?" Tom shrugged. "I don't know. But if it is, it means Max isn't just a dog. He's a messenger." The photograph shook Rachel to her core. Could Max really be more than just a dog? The possibility seemed too outlandish, yet too compelling to dismiss. Tom's story of the 1956 fire and the similarities between the dog in the photograph and Max weren't mere coincidences. Something greater was at play. The next few days brought more questions than answers. Max continued to show up at the hospital, sitting vigilantly outside the pediatric wing as if waiting for a call to action. Rachel, Olivia, and Paul began to notice a pattern every time Max appeared. Someone in need was nearby. The mystery deepened when Rachel decided to take Ethan for a short walk outside. Max was there, waiting by the hospital's entrance. He wagged his tail softly as Rachel approached. "Hey, boy," she said, crouching down. "Are you here for us?" Max licked Ethan's tiny hand, his eyes meeting Rachel's with an expression so profound it sent shivers down her spine. At that moment, Rachel realized something: Max wasn't just a guardian, he was a guide. The turning point came when Rachel, Olivia, and Paul decided to meet Tom again. They gathered in a quiet room at the hospital, where Tom revealed another artifact, a small journal, passed down by his grandmother, detailing an account of the fire the dog in the photograph had saved the children from. "This journal talks about visions," Tom said, flipping through the pages. "The children who survived the fire said they saw a man before the dog arrived, a man who told them to stay calm, that help was coming." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "Hey, Mag, in my dream?" Tom nodded. "Exactly like that." Olivia leaned forward. "Do you think these visions are connected? That Max is being directed?" "I don't think it," Tom said. "I know it." Later that week, Max led Olivia to a young mother who had collapsed in the parking lot. She was clutching her chest, her toddler crying by her side. Olivia called for help immediately, and the doctors confirmed she was experiencing a heart attack. The medical team's swift response saved her life. As the commotion settled, Olivia turned to find Max watching from a distance, his job seemingly done. But as he walked away this time, he stopped and looked back. He didn't move until Olivia followed him.
"What is it, Max?"
she whispered. He led her to the hospital chapel. Inside the quiet chapel, Olivia found Rachel sitting in the last pew, holding Ethan. Tears streamed down Rachel's face as she stared at a stained glass window depicting an angel cradling a lamb. "I've been thinking about the dream," Rachel said softly. "The man I saw. What if he's the one guiding Max? What if this is divine intervention?" Olivia sat beside her, feeling a chill run down her spine. "I think you're right," she said. "Max isn't just a dog. He's a messenger." A few nights later, Max made his most extraordinary appearance yet. A storm had knocked out power in parts of the hospital, throwing the staff into chaos. In the pediatric wing, the backup generator for the neonatal unit began to fail, leaving several premature babies, including Ethan, in danger. As nurses scrambled to find a solution, Max appeared, barking frantically. He ran to the emergency exit, pawing at the door. Paul, trusting the dog's instincts, opened it, and Max bolted into the storm. Paul and Olivia followed, unsure of what they would find. Max led them to a utility truck parked a block away. The driver, a maintenance worker who had fallen asleep waiting for a call, jolted awake as Max barked at the window. "What's going on?" the worker asked, stepping out. "The generator," Olivia shouted. "We need help." The man grabbed his tools and followed them back to the hospital. Within minutes, he had the generator running again, saving the babies' lives. After the storm passed, Max sat quietly outside the hospital, his fur damp but his demeanor calm. Rachel, holding Ethan, approached him. "You've done so much for us," she said, her voice trembling. "Why do I feel like you're saying goodbye?" Max licked her hand gently and looked at Ethan one last time. Then, without a sound, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Weeks passed, but Max didn't return. Rachel, Olivia, Paul, and Tom shared their stories with others, and Max's legend grew. For Rachel, every time she looked at Ethan, she saw the impact Max had made on their lives. Olivia, too, found her faith renewed, believing that some mysteries weren't meant to be fully understood. Tom left the hospital a few days later, his notebook now filled with Max's extraordinary tale. These animals, he told Olivia before he left, remind us of something we often forget: there's more to this world than what we can see. As for Max, no one ever saw him again. But for those who had been touched by his presence, his message was clear. Miracles come in many forms, and sometimes they walk on four legs.